This is the Influencer Inc. podcast, where you're going to learn to build your personal brand and your career in business through social media, public speaking, writing, and PR. I'm your host, Josh Steinley. All right, I'm here with Brian Fanzo. Brian's a social media expert with an interesting career path that includes leading a team of over 30 developers and trainers at the Department of Defense to implement and develop solutions that empowered the different branches of the U.S. military to share and collaborate, leveraging social business tools. Brian's role included 2 trips to Afghanistan, 3 to Iraq, as well as briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon. Brian is the host of the Smack Talk and FOMO Fans podcasts. He spoke at over 50 events in 11 countries in 2016, and he has over 250,000 engaged social media followers. And this is the really abbreviated bio. Like, there's all this stuff Brian's done that I had to cut out because it was just like I'd be talking for a half hour. We never get around to actually talking to Brian. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I know I keep needing to cut down the bio every time. I'm like, I guess gotta cut that down, but I appreciate, excited to be on the show.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you as well. Now, we start the show off with the same question for everybody, which is, what does the word influencer mean to you?
So influencer to me means someone that inspires action through what they do, how they do it, and why they do things, right? I think the inspiring action is the biggest part, right? Just because you have a lot of followers or you have a lot, you have a broadcasting platform, if people aren't taking action based on your words or what you do, or sometimes even why you do things, then you're truly not an influencer. An influencer actually inspires action, and that's where I kind of draw the line between the two differences.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit more about what you do and your influencer journey and everything. This is really interesting because you've got like this military background and Department of Defense stuff. Like, that's not something you commonly see in somebody's background.
Yeah, I'm a computer science major. I love technology and computers, and I got a role working for the DoD based out of the Pentagon. We were deploying cybersecurity training solutions at every military base in the U.S. And what our job was, believe it or not, was to get different military branches to share and collaborate around cybersecurity policies. So getting the Army to share with the Navy. So if you ever think that your job or collaboration is hard, I was trying to break years and years of different things in siloed organizations, but it was great. I did it 9 years, but I got to a point where everything I was doing, I really found a passion for collaboration and helping people. I looked at technology and thought technology is what I was passionate about. But I discovered, about 9 or 10 years after college, that I was really passionate about helping people embrace change. Technology isn't the thing that I focused on. Technology happened to be the thing that most people kind of surrounded about. So I kind of crazily left the government, gave up my security clearance, and I went and worked in probably the most boring technology industry you could ever imagine, which is the data center industry. And we were a startup migrating from the data center into cloud computing. And my job, I got a dream job. I got to model it after 2 of the biggest influencers for me, and it was Guy Kawasaki at Apple and Robert Scoble at Microsoft. And they had these jobs that were technology evangelists. And I studied what they did. I actually got to get to know the 2 of them, and I found a startup that allowed me to report to the CEO and have a dotted line to the CIO and a dotted line to the CMO in this evangelist role. And I did that for 2 years at the startup. And that's actually where I discovered the word influencer. And it's a weird story of where that all kind of came to light. But I was hosting a Google Plus show with a friend at the time called Social Business Hour, and it was all about collaboration. And we had a couple guests on. We had all these different guests on. And the Economist actually awarded me the top 25 social business leaders of the future, an award in 2014. But the title of the article that actually was sent to my CEO was, we've identified Brian Fanzo as an influencer. And the CEO of the company comes in and he tosses in. He's like, hey, congratulations. You've got awarded this based on what you've been able to do at our company, what you're doing with your show and all these things. He's like, what is an influencer? And I remember looking at him, and this is, early 2014. I was like, give me a second to hit Google, right? And I was literally Googling. And so that's where I look at this, because at the time, what I was really focused on, and it's still something I pride myself on, is I'm not focused on being the smartest at everything or the smartest at even what I do. I work hard at sharing how I do things, why I do things, and I just kind of bring that to light, right? And so for me, the journey has been amazing, and that award is really what kickstarted it. And I got to go around to different TED events. The award had, Scott Monty, who was the head of social at Ford. It had some amazing thought leaders that were part of this group, and it allowed me to open up doors. And I got brought onto the IBM team as part of their first influencer group. I got to become, an influencer for SAP, Dell, Samsung, Applebee's, UFC, and most of it was about, hey Brian, we want you to, bring what we're doing to your community through your eyes, right? And it was an amazing ride. I can tell you that I always joke about lists and awards because they don't pay the bills. There's lots of awards and lists that are out there, but that one award that I got from the Economist, which was the Future Social Business Leader, it really opened up the door for me to leave. And I left the startup and became an entrepreneur about 4 years ago, and I'm doing that same thing now.
Man, that's awesome. That's such a cool story. So do you work mostly by yourself? Do you have a team supporting you? What's that look like?
So I had a fairly large team. We were working more in an agency type model, and I realized that really wasn't as much something that I love to do. And so now I'm a team of one. I do have a couple people that work with me as kind of subcontractors, mainly for editing and for kind of organizing my chaotic schedule with speaking both inbound speaking as well as the travel that I do. But at the moment, I'm kind of a team of one. I've kind of figuring out what this all means. I love that. I love to be able to speak, and speaking is my main source of revenue today. The two podcasts that I host are also sponsored, so that's kind of a nice way of doing it. But I always tell everybody, for me, my true passion and what I love doing, and it's why I'm happy. I wake up happy, I go to bed happy, is I love connecting great people with great people to do great things. And that's where I'm kind of focused on. I take that same mentality with influencer work, as a speaker, as a host of a podcast, and hopefully as I kind of scale and grow a business around that model as well.
So as a speaker doing a lot of speaking, what's an embarrassing moment you've had in front of an audience?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I've spoken at some amazing events. I spoke at a dog conference called Bark World, where there was more dogs than there was people in the audience. The dogs were on the tables. It was actually an amazing event. You had a chance to speak there because they were all influencers in the pet space, where their dogs have hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of followers on Instagram, if you believe it or not. And it was a great event to speak at. But one of the most embarrassing moments was I was doing 4 events in 1 week, and I haven't done 4 events in 1 week since this moment. And I was in Nebraska, and I was going on stage, and I got on stage, and the event that I was doing the next day was the Dental Association Leadership Conference. And the event I was doing today was marketing technology. And I got up there and I made a dental joke to start off the keynote without even as it didn't go over, I'm like, well, this audience is gonna be interesting. I didn't even realize it was the wrong one until someone actually came off the stage and said, that was a weird segue at the beginning. And I was like, why was that? And it was one of those weird moments where afterwards I had apologized to everybody. I think almost thankfully I didn't realize it on stage because I still was able to do my very best work on stage. But I've since that day, I kind of, as I'm walking on stage, I repeat to myself what event I'm at so that I open up with the right line. So that was a rough one.
The perils of having too many speaking engagements, huh?
Yeah, I know. It's a rough life. Like I said, I'm not doing 4 a week right now, but if I probably was given that opportunity again, you won't see me turn it down.
That's great. So you mentioned podcast sponsorship, and I'm curious to take just a little side detour here because we haven't discussed this with any of the other speakers, but how does podcast sponsorship work? I mean, if somebody's out there and they're saying, hey, I'm going to launch a podcast, but I need to make money too. What goals do they need to set? What level do they need to be at before they can go out and they can monetize that podcast? How's that worked for you?
That's a great question. And when I was a podcast listener now for over 7 years. I do a lot of video work. I'm known a lot for the live video stuff that I do with big brands, but I consume almost all of my content via podcast. I'm a big podcast fan, and I'm a big fan of those that have done it and done it the right way. So John Lee Dumas, Pat Flynn, I was actually on Michael O'Neill's podcast, the Solopreneur Hour this earlier week. And a lot of them, they would always tell me, Brian, set your goal at 100 episodes before you even thought about monetization. And they would also say, the model has to really allow you to have a certain amount of downloads and a lot of, clicks per download. And there's a lot of different models around it. But what I decided to do was kind of take a different approach. And what I pitch brands with, and what my media kit is, would you like to be a part of my community? Would you like to support my community? And in my community, we actually broadcast the podcast live on Facebook Live and Periscope. We get a fairly large amount of live viewers. Then we also have the downloads on the podcast. But then I also do a blog post with it and a social graphic. And what my goal always is when I'm working with brands is like, how can I make your life easier or help you solve a goal? And oftentimes podcasting reaches an audience that no other content medium does. And so I think the old school way of podcast sponsorship, and not even old school, it still works today. If you have a certain amount of downloads, and it's a lot of downloads, then you can charge per download. And that's I like to say that's the apples to apples model against radio. But I like to go, I don't want apples. If everybody's zigging, I like to zag. And what I really focused was, well, how can I bring value to brands? So right now, my one podcast is sponsored by 9 Spokes. And they're a brand out of New Zealand that is a data dashboard. And what they really wanted was they wanted feedback. They wanted people to start talking about their tool, but they also wanted, let's say influencers to understand what their tool was trying to do and give them good feedback on, corrective feedback on, hey, I would love to have this dashboard show this. And so interestingly enough, they didn't really care about how many total people I could reach. They were rather cared about me reaching a certain people. And the funny thing is those people were my guests. So rather than me actually pitching, hey, I need to get these amount of downloads to reach the total audience, what ended up happening was if I can get these guests, if I know that these type of people are listening, then the podcast sponsor would find value. And then another sponsor, we have HP that sponsors our Smack Talk podcast. And what we do with them is we want to like, hey, we want to connect with you guys, but we also want to be a part of your offline events. So next week I'm flying to Chicago and we're actually broadcasting live the podcast for 3 days from their event. So live in Chicago. And so the event isn't HP heavy. It's not full of HP guests, but what we do is we actually take that conversation to HP, and that allows them to bring a new audience in. It allows them also to kind of work with us. And so for me, and this is where I look at a lot of things with sponsorship, is you have to understand the pain point a brand has. And if podcasting can solve it, or some way around podcasting can solve it, shape your kit that way. And you'll be amazed how many brands would love to get the ear of a lot of people that are multitasking or too busy to read a blog or watch a video.
That's awesome. That's so cool to get that insight. So knowing what you know now, what do you wish you would have been doing years ago? I mean, 5-10 years ago, if you could go back in time, what would you change? What would you be implementing back then?
Well, the first thing I would have done was I would have had a blog, and I would have written from the day one. I was the guy that I had a large Twitter following. Twitter is still my primary platform. It's still where I have my largest following. But for me, I was just like, I was guest blogging on a lot of sites. I was, and there was nothing bad about that, but I didn't have a home. I didn't have an owned media of my own. And when I was sending people places, I was often sending them to someone else's blog for them to, read my content, but sometimes, purchase their services or go to their place. And even before I had any services, I didn't really understand the value of that written content, right? And this is segued into a book. I've put off writing a book now for 3 years. My book will come out this fall for the first time. But I kind of put it off because I didn't understand like that it was reaching a different audience, right? I love social media. I love digital. But I talk a lot about now, what I think I wish I knew is that it's no longer about the field of dreams, right? The Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner movie. If you build it, they will come. That is not the way it works anymore. Now you actually have to bring the content to your audience where your audience is. And I was missing out on an audience that read blog content. I'm missing out today with a lot of executives that say, Brian, I want to hire you to speak, but for me to pitch my fellow executives, I need a tangible book to give them, right? And I'm missing that opportunity. And it was something that I was a little naive. I was a little stubborn because I kind of believed that, once you got to know me, once you saw me on stage, but if they weren't getting to know me, they hadn't discovered me, they had never heard of me, I was almost, hurting myself. I was cannibalizing myself by not having a blog. I'm not a big writer. So what I found is that I transcribe and do show notes for my podcast. I do a video blog about once a week, and then I do voice dictation, and then I have an editor, right? So I wasn't a big blogger because of grammar. I'm not a huge grammar guy. I struggled through English. I probably didn't pay attention in English class. And I can talk all day long. My mom likes to say I came out of the womb talking. My tagline is I talk fast and I tweet faster. And for me, I really wish I would have embraced blogging and then the book process early on. But now I'm all in on that. And I think for those listening, if this is something you want to do, start being okay with telling your story on mediums or in mediums that you're maybe not used to leveraging.
Awesome. This is such good stuff. What do you think is one of the top reasons that new people who are getting started fail? I mean, you see people like something like 99% of all podcasts don't get past 10 episodes. I mean, I'm making that up, but it's something like that. You see a lot of people, they start blogging, they get through 3 posts and they quit. But it's not just laziness. There are other things going on there. Why do you think these people fail when they're getting started? They're all excited, but then it doesn't work out. Why is that?
Well, we live in like an instant gratification society today, right? We want things, when we want it, where we want it. I make this joke all the time. I'm 36 years old. So I say I'm a pager wearing millennial. I had a pager at one time. I didn't have Facebook in college, but I am a millennial. So I do fall in that group. But for me, like TV was dictated, when I could consume content was dictated by a TV channel, right? And they had commercials in it. And I used to say, the funny line is like, my reward for being a good student in high school was my mom and dad let me stay up and watch 90210 on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m., right? Like, and for kids today, they get House of Cards downloaded, right? They have all the things in their phone. They're consuming, and we're living in a different world with that instant gratification, but I don't think that's actually the problem. The problem is, right now, there's so much going on, so many shiny objects. I mean, my podcast is called FOMO Fans, the fear of missing out. And my goal of that show is to cure your fear of missing out. But part of the problem is we not only get distracted by shiny objects, but we hook our message and our mission to somebody else. And so there's 2 things I think everyone's doing wrong in this space. The first one is they undervalue consistency. Consistency is so important. And it's so hard, right? I mean, doing a podcast, I made this mistake. My very first year of my very first podcast, we took the month of January off after launching for the full year. And we just decided, you know what, we're going to do no episode in January. We'll come back in February. It took us 9 months to build back to the downloads and listenership that we had that previous December for multiple reasons. But the consistency, people want to be able to know that if they go to their app, they tune on their notifications, or they spend any of their time, that you're going to be there and you're going to provide that. And consistency is hard. I mean, podcasting is probably the greatest example. If you're not consistently creating podcast content, you're going to fail. And then the second piece that I think a majority of us do wrong is we kind of live in a copycat society. I mean, I tell you what, I get this email maybe once a week. Brian, I am doing everything that Gary Vaynerchuk is doing, and nobody's noticing me. And I always reply back and say, you are the exhaust of someone else. Why would someone want to follow you if you are doing exactly what someone else is doing, right? And I think this is a different, because in the old, I would say when I was in college, I looked at it and said, there wasn't a lot of access to the thought leaders, right? The people that I looked up to, even Guy Kawasaki and Robert Scoble, I talked about that earlier, that they were my influencers, but I couldn't tweet them at the time. I couldn't even, I had to read their book, or if I went to an event, I would hope to see them on stage. Well, now we live in a world where Gary Vaynerchuk's going to reply to you. Ty Lopez is going to give you a shout out on his Instagram. And all of a sudden, we kind of forgot that you have to actually do something of value. You have to earn your stripes, but you have to actually be unique. And I think that is a weird space, because if you're doing the same as everyone else or the same as that one person, you just become the exhaust. And in a world full of way too much content, way too much me, if you are just the same as someone else, you will never stand out. You'll easily get discouraged. You'll blame everyone else and you'll quit what you're doing. And I think it's unfortunate, because I think this is a space today that everyone has a story to tell. You just have to own your story and put in the time, be consistent, and be willing to get there. Because I'm living proof in that space. I got a giant leap in 2014. I've had a hockey stick curve, but I've probably had a rockier 2017 than I ever would have imagined. But it's allowed me to really set my stake in the ground and know where I'm going. And I'm glad it's happened.
Man, such good stuff. All right, this next part's called the favorite 5, rapid fire, quick answers. What's one of your favorite books?
Ooh, my Jab, 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 Right Hook, Gary Vaynerchuk. It got me wanting to be in marketing, and no guidance counselor and no school class in college had me caring about marketing until I read Jab, 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 Right Hook by Gary V.
Awesome. Who's a favorite influencer of yours you look up to?
Ooh, favorite influencer of mine that I look up to. So there's a couple across, I think a couple different spaces that I really have had a massive impact on what I'm doing or how I'm doing different things. But Jay Bear is a content marketer, and he is just one of those guys that he's a great guy. He was very successful in real estate, now very successful content marketer, very successful speaker. And his book, Utility, I actually read Utility at the same time I read Jab, 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 Right Hook, the exact same month. One was on Kindle, one was on paperback. You know, typical millennial. I was distracted in reading both of them. But Jay is a person that I believe is doing it the right way. He doesn't concede to the industry pressure, but he also isn't a famous guy. He's a guy that isn't afraid to show his vulnerabilities, his human side. He was taking his daughter to college this past weekend, and I think that to me resonated. And he went from an influencer to someone I watched on stage to a friend, and I'm very blessed now that I can text message back and forth with him regularly. So he's the first one that jumped to mind.
Awesome. What's favorite conference, group, or event?
You know what? My favorite, I think this is an interesting world we're living in with so much digital noise and so many things that are out there. And I'm actually going to say South by Southwest. And I'm going to say South by Southwest now, not even the old days, right? Because there's a lot of people that were there early on and say it's so different now. But where I think it's at today is it's at its best place, because South by brings in such a wide range of people. It's really a cross section of the world with the music and the film. But why I love South by Southwest is it's at its core, it's about all of these people that are coming together that have some kind of message to share. And it's noisy. There's lots of people there. It's amazing. But I was challenged my very first year. I think it was 5 years ago. They're like, Brian, I know you think that you talk a lot, you can meet people, but you're not going to stand out at South by Southwest. You're not going to meet everyone. But I got some great advice. They told me never say yes to a event or a party. Say maybe to everything and let the serendipity of that event take you to where it goes. And I can tell you, I've had numerous business opportunities, multiple friendships that are as strong friendships that I've ever had, based on like someone just running into me on the street at South by and saying, hey, Brian, I'm going to this, come with me. And I went there with them. I ended up getting connected with the CEO of Uber. And all of a sudden I'm connected with these people that it was that element of just allowing the event to come together. And so that's one to me that I absolutely love. I have a great time. I probably won't miss it as long as it stays together. And it's not because it's not like its old grassroots Twitter launch days. It's because to me, it is about people.
Awesome. What's your preferred social network?
So I think Twitter is where I have the largest following. I love Twitter. I think Twitter, leveraging hashtags, understanding the lists, and really, I tweet Twitter like one-to-one conversations happening in a public arena, because it's the only platform that exists that you might not know me, you might not like me, you might not have ever heard of me, but if you are searching a hashtag, you're following a certain conversation, maybe you're searching a phrase, you can discover me. On all of the other platforms, you have to almost, if Facebook, you have to be a friend of mine or a friend of friend, right? On Instagram, they do have the hashtag there, but Twitter has allowed me to grow in ways that I would have never imagined. But I will say my favorite one to consume content on at the moment is Instagram. I really think, Mark Zuckerberg and the team at Facebook, when they took that over with Instagram stories, the content being able to kind of add context to what's going on in your Instagram feed. Instagram is the first one I open in the morning and the last one I close at the end of the night. As a fan, as an influencer, I think Twitter is still my number one.
Cool. What's a tool that you use in doing all your stuff? Hardware, software, website, something you can't live without?
Buffer. I use Buffer. I swear by Buffer. Buffer. I wrote a blog in 2014 that said, when I launch a startup one day, I want it to be like Buffer, because Buffer is an amazing company built on happiness and transparency and culture. But their tool is amazing. It allows me. I use a tool called Flipboard, which is another tool I will swear by. But every morning I consume 30 minutes of content on Flipboard. And I consume the content, and what I like and think my audience will find valuable, all I say is Buffer. And Buffer allows me to schedule it at the time where my community is most likely to consume it, right? Because the old way, prior to Buffer, it was usually 11 o'clock at night. I would get on Flipboard. It was called Zeit. There was an app called Zeit back then. And I would consume content. I would tweet it out. And if you weren't on Twitter between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. on the East Coast time, you didn't think I added value to your life at all. But all of a sudden, when I started using Buffer and I was able to consume when I want to and share when my majority of my community was on it, it's a game changer. I run 18 Twitter accounts right now, personally, kind of across the mediums and the media stuff that I work, and all of it is managed through Buffer.
Awesome. Yeah, I love Buffer too. Where's the best place for people to learn more about you and what you do?
So I said consistency is important, so I better back it up. So I am iSocialFans with a Z or a Z at the end. Every new channel, every platform, I have that same username. My website is isocialfans.com. It's a play on my last name, my Apple fanboy-ness. So the I is for iProducts, iPhone, iPad. I created 8 Twitter accounts when I started on Twitter, and everyone had fans at the end because my last name is Fanzo. And I would have never known at the time. It was actually the 7th of the 8 Twitter accounts that I created was iSocialFans, but it's kind of turned out to my brand is my company. And so it doesn't matter from live streaming on Periscope, or if you want to go to Facebook, if you look up iSocialFans, you'll find me on every channel.
Awesome. So cool. So now if you're listening to this on the podcast episode, head on over to influencesummit.co, because Brian and I are about to go into a deep dive on how to be authentic, how to be the same online and offline. And we're going to do an interview, but this is exclusive content. It's only available through Influence Summit 2017, that website, which is influencesummit.co. But Brian, thank you so much for being on this segment. Thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure. You invoke a little bit of FOMO there. I love it. Let's do it. Join us over there on the website.
All right. That wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and join us over at influencerinc.co.